Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Norman Rockwell. He's considered a quintessential American artist, and Norman Rockwell got his claim to fame creating covers for the Saturday Evening Post, Boy Scout calendars, and Look magazine. Known for his sentimental and warm depiction of classic Americana, he created over 4,000 works in his lifetime. Despite this, he still said, "I'll never have enough time to paint all the pictures I'd like to." Though his paintings were sometimes criticized as being overly romanticized, they are without a doubt some of the most popular pieces of American art. He once said, "The commonplaces of America are to me the richest subjects in art. Boys battling flies on vacant lots, little girls playing jacks on the front steps, old men plodding home at twilight. All these things arouse feeling in me." So today we're going to talk about some of Rockwell's wartime paintings. Because he was illustrating during most of the major wars of the 20th century, we won't be able to cover nearly all of Norman Rockwell's work that honors military service, but we're going to look at a few standout pieces. This one is called The Clubhouse Examination. So going back to 1917, Rockwell shows us a different kind of recruitment center. Even on tiptoe, our would-be soldier doesn't measure up to the necessary height. And if you look just above the shorter boy's head, you'll see how the child has spelled necessary, Nesissary, and height, HITE. So you can tell this is a clubhouse for kids. The recruiter, also spelled with two O's, decked out in a combination scout and soldier attire, was one of Rockwell's favorite early models, Billy Payne, who was in 15 of Rockwell's post covers. So we've got some children here trying out to be in their version of the army, and he's getting measured for his height and capability. This picture of the armchair general is from 1944, and you can see it's a cover of the Post for 10 cents at the time. Tracing each advance and retreat is more than just an interesting pastime for this gentleman. The service flag behind him, with 3 stars, indicates he has that number of sons serving. We can only hope that the stars remain forever blue, as a gold star represents a serviceman who will not return home. With his remarkable eye for detail, Rockwell shows a tiny photo of each boy by the flag, photos of Generals MacArthur and Eisenhower, a wall map, and an old-fashioned radio. This picture of Rosie the Riveter from May 29th, 1943. Norman Rockwell's Rosie the Riveter received mass distribution on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post on Memorial Day of 1943. Rockwell's illustration features a brawny woman taking her lunch break with a rivet gun on her lap. Beneath her, a copy of Hitler's manifesto Mein Kampf and a lunch pail labeled Rosie. Rockwell based the pose to match Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling painting of the prophet Isaiah. Rockwell's model was a Vermont resident, then 19-year-old Mary Doyle Keefe, who was a telephone operator near where Rockwell lived, not a riveter. Rockwell painted his Rosie as a larger woman than his model, and he later actually phoned her to apologize. The Post's cover image proved hugely popular, and the magazine loaned it to the U.S. Treasury Department for the duration of the war, for use in war bond drives. This is not the most famous picture we see of Rosie the Riveter, which ended up on a wartime poster, which has the woman in the red and white polka dot bandana flexing her arm, and it says, "We can do it." Readers of the Saturday Evening Post in 1944 would have recognized the slice of homefront life pictured here in Norman Rockwell Visits a Ration Board. Every adult in those years lived his or her life around constant shortages of gas, meat, sugar, and rubber. And ration coupons allowed the purchase of a strictly limited amount of these products. Occasionally, an unexpected need would come up, and a citizen could appeal to the local rationing board for extra provisions. When Rockwell asked permission to portray his own ration board in Arlington, Vermont, he was met at first with suspicion. They had been approached by citizens from so many angles for obtaining rationing exemptions that they might have been excused for thinking Rockville had hit on another ploy. But Rockwell convinced them he was earnest. They asked, jokingly no doubt, that he at least make them look good in the finished picture. Rockwell instantly recognized a bargaining point. He replied, "If I do, will you give me a B card?" Like most Americans, Rockwell had an A card, which entitled him to purchase 3 to 4 gallons of gas each week. But if his rationing board had thought his work was important to national defense, he could have been given a B card, which would let him buy up to 8 gallons a week. We'll never know whether he failed to make his illustration flattering enough, or whether the board members simply failed to see why the artist's work rose to the level of national security, but Rockwell's request was rejected. He has actually hidden himself here in this picture. He's not the man standing in the beige trench coat, but he is the man sitting behind him with the pipe in his mouth and the bow tie. We've now arrived at the end of World War II in this picture titled War Stories from 1945. A war hero holding a Japanese flag has tales of war to tell. The memories are likely not light, the retelling not boastful, and the life-altering experiences he relates are riveting. The news article on the wall shows that the soldier is a local hero. As I mentioned briefly on our Rosie the Riveter picture, Rockwell often worked from live models. The model for this painting was indeed a decorated Marine named Dwayne Parks. Rockwell found him in Dorset, Vermont. The other models were Arlington, Vermont neighbors of the artist. The man with the pipe, leaning in to listen, was the owner of the garage, Bob Benedict. The man posing as the policeman was Arlington town clerk and newspaper editor. The young boys Rockwell found even closer to home. The boy sitting next to the Marine was his youngest son, Peter, and the blonde boy to the right was his oldest son, Jerry. They appear in many Rockwell paintings. On a lighter note, for another returned serviceman, we have a restful snooze in a hammock on a quiet, sun-dappled afternoon. Who could wish for more for our loved ones returning home? Perhaps this is how some of you spent your long weekend. This one is titled Home at Last, and it is from 1945. Rockwell was a borrower for this painting. He borrowed the sailor, soon to return to the Navy, from Williams College. The sailor's uniform was borrowed from a shipmate, as the model didn't have the decorations on his own. The house was borrowed from a neighbor, the hammock from another neighbor. Rockwell borrowed the dog from his son Tommy. The shoes were not borrowed, however. They belonged to Norman Rockwell. Some of the most famous of Norman Rockwell's art is right here on this page, called The Four Freedoms. If you look at the third picture, Freedom from Want, we have looked at that photo before about holiday art. It is probably one of his most recognizable images. In his January 1941 address to Congress, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt articulated his vision for a post-war world founded on four basic human freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. In the spring of 1942, Norman Rockwell was working on a different piece commissioned by the Ordnance Department of the US Army, but he wanted to do more for the war effort and decided he would illustrate Roosevelt's four freedoms. Finding new ideas for paintings never came easily, but this was a great challenge. He said, "It was so darned high blown, somehow I just couldn't get my mind around it." While mulling it over, Rockwell, by chance, attended a town meeting where one man rose among his neighbors and voiced an unpopular view. That night, Rockwell awoke with the realization that he could paint the freedoms best from the perspective of his own hometown experiences, using everyday, simple scenes such as his town meeting. Rockwell was given permission to interrupt his work for the Saturday Evening Post, typically one cover per month for 3 months. Rockwell got a bad case of stage fright, according to his own words, and it was 2.5 months before he even began the project. "It was a job that should have been tackled by Michelangelo," he said in a New Yorker interview 3 years later. The paintings were a phenomenal success. After their publication, the Post received 25,000 requests for reprints. In May 1943, representatives from the Post and the US Treasury announced a joint campaign to sell war bonds and stamps. They would send the Four Freedoms paintings, along with 1,000 original cartoons and paintings by other illustrators, and original manuscripts from the Saturday Evening Post on a national tour. Traveling to 16 cities, the exhibition was visited by more than 1 million people who purchased $133 million in war bonds and stamps. The Four Freedoms are now part of the permanent collection of the Norman Rockwell Museum and reside in their own specially designed gallery space, inviting visitors to reflect on their inspiring message. And as I said, Norman Rockwell painted many, many pictures of wartime, of soldiers returning home, of all the different aspects of American life that were affected during World War II and during the other wars during which Rockwell was illustrating. But these are the ones that still stand out the most to this day. So I hope you all had a peaceful Memorial Day and that you get the chance to reflect on what these four freedoms mean to each of you.